Hello and welcome to the Optimising Human Performance podcast. I'm John Paul Nevin.
And I'm Martin Jones.
In this show, we talk to world-leading experts about how to unlock the full potential of people who operate in high-stress, high-stakes environments.
Today, we're joined by Tim Boughton, whose own personal experiences with PTSD led him to become a trailblazer in the world of mental health, with a particular expertise in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and trauma.
A lot of elite operators, a lot of people that have been in high performance their whole life, have genuinely been in such cortisol overload or amygdala hijack that you're almost peeling them off the ceiling before getting them down to a window of tolerance that they can operate in and understand what it is you're doing.
We discuss mindfulness techniques and the power that it has to transform people's lives.
It's about seeing the wood from the trees when others are all consumed by all this bombardment and therefore gaining the competitive advantage.
We explore the misconceptions around mindfulness, the stigma associated with mental health, and how understanding the mind-body connection challenges existing military practices.
The body is the radar for the mind. And this is where the Special Forces philosophy falls down in my view. It tells us to ignore our body, take it further, further. And then the body just turns around and goes, right, bang, have some of that.
Hi, Tim, and welcome to the Optimising Human Performance podcast. How are you today?
Great. And it's a real honour to be here amongst such amazing guests that you've had so far. So I don't know how I've fallen through the net, but I'm very grateful.
You just got lucky. That's all it is. No, seriously, we're really happy to have you. We're going to dive into some pretty interesting stuff today. To start us off, can you introduce yourself? Tell us about your background, what you currently do.
Yeah, thanks. So my background is I had a military background for 20 years as an infantry officer initially, and then as a commando helicopter pilot flying Sea Kings and Mark 7 Lynxes with the Navy, and then left in 2008 and then went into a career in banking in the city. Ended up doing a lot in that sphere. And then really it was through that I then got involved with the mental health side. So from a military background to a banking background to then a sort of wider sphere into human performance, into mindfulness, into trauma, into that sort of thing from my own experiences. I dive across various spheres of financial helping people to the mental health side, where I advise various units on mental health and to some degree human performance, both on this side of the water and across the water.
Fantastic. Let's dive in then. You said you've had your own experience, how you came in to be interested in mental health. Can we talk about that? What initially happened to stimulate this interest for you?
So I came from a broken home. I joined the military to find a family. The initial regiment that I joined was a Scottish regiment, and then had various interactions with Northern Ireland, Bosnia, and then transferring over to the Fleet Air Arm and flying. And I think there was a lot of my sort of youthful experiences of trying to fit in, of wanting to be wanted and liked, which we now look back on and realise that probably there's many of us that are in that situation or have been in that situation through the experiences that we've been through. And then in 2008, when I left, I was very fortunate to get a job in banking when the whole banking world was declining and falling apart. And I sort of then went through a tumble, quite a fall of past experiences catching up with me in terms of my youth, in terms of understanding, in terms of then going out to a completely new environment in the city. And I ended up with PTSD, not from anything I've done in the military, because I'm an abject coward, but through the experience of childhood, through the experience of a new environment, through the experience of trying to fit in, and various sort of suicidal idealizations and various things like that. And the military was ill-equipped to deal with that. There was this push to try and go to, right, the answer is SSRIs. We're going to throw you on serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and that's going to be the answer. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to put this in my body. I want to find a way of understanding why I feel the way I do, why my thoughts are my thoughts, and looking at a way to really sort of understand it. And so there was then a deep dive into Elizabeth Stanley's work on the window of tolerance, Babette Rothschild's work on trauma with Peter Levine. We're also looking back to Stoic philosophers and also going back to people like Pierre Janet in 1867, who devised the three-phase model of dealing with trauma. And I was really fascinated by it. And the more I delved into it and the more that I got involved with it, the more I felt myself changing, the more positive, the more strong, the more resilient, the more understanding I was. And that led me to the mindfulness side of things, which was literally somebody saying to me, look, have you tried mindfulness? And I was like, yeah, no, I'm not trying that. It's all sort of guff, isn't it? Sitting down, cross-legged, all that sort of stuff. And whilst there is certainly an element of that, what I found was as I went through on that journey, one of the biggest issues was a lack of qualified, good practitioners. And people who say, oh, I'm a mindfulness instructor, great, what have you done? You know, I've been on retreat to India for 2 weeks and now I'm the guru on teaching mindfulness.
That'd be pretty good qualifications compared to some of the people I've met.
Yeah, well, I think
that seems quite extensive.
It is. Yeah, and right the way down to these sort of online courses, like sort of, oh, you can be a mindfulness instructor in 2 weeks. And what I was finding was that they were really ill-equipped to deal with trauma and understand trauma and trauma sensitivity. And so I sort of made it my sideline passion and an absolute head mark that I would really understand what trauma is and what its effect is on the body and how we deal with trauma. And then latterly, how we use mindfulness in the scope of trauma to deal with a lot of daily issues. And the more I got into it, the more I was sort of taken by it, which led me to going to Oxford University to doing a master's in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So how do we use mindfulness? How do we combine it with cognitive therapy? How do we do trauma overlay on all of that? And so that sort of led me to the 15-year journey to where I am today, and came out of it as a sort of trained mindfulness instructor, but then went on this journey of really understanding more and expanding that, and then working with other people to say, okay, how do we take mainstream mindfulness and move it from there?
So mindfulness is many different things to many different people. There's many different apps available. As you said, there's lots of different people who have got different sales pitches around what mindfulness is or what isn't. You just mentioned MBCT. You know, there's other therapies like mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, that kind of thing. Can you give us a whistle-stop tour of what is it? Like when we're talking about mindfulness, what is it? And maybe how do we differentiate between the free app on the phone versus something like MBCT that you mentioned?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So mindfulness, in terms of its definition by Jon Kabat-Zinn, is the awareness we bring to paying attention in the present moment on purpose, without judgment, to things as they are, right? So it is that ability to take a pause, and to me it's about response over reaction, right? Interesting you say MBSR and MBCT. MBCT came from MBSR and Jon Kabat-Zinn's work, and this idea of looking at the Buddhist way of doing mindfulness to a larger degree, and mindfulness that was then growing in terms of depression, how we were treating depression, and combining it with the cognitive behavioural therapy approach to then give us the modality that is now mindfulness-based cognitive therapy.
And so was it based around pain? Is that right?
Yes.
Was MBSR for chronic pain sufferers? Is that right?
Yeah, so Jon Kabat-Zinn was going to hospitals where people were in chronic pain from various illnesses, and he basically developed this whole idea of the MBSR approach, stress reduction, and it was found to be really successful. And then that was taken on by Ziegel and Professor Mark Williams from Oxford into, okay, well, how can we look at this for depression and recurrence of depression? And what they found was, in the studies that came out, was that the use of mindfulness, or MBCT, for depression was equal, if not better, to the use of SSRIs. And so defining mindfulness in today's society, for me, forget the woo-woo stuff. It's about how do we pause? How do we focus our attention? How do we just look at how we do things on a daily basis?
Tim, if we take it out the clinical realm, and think about the performance of those who operate in high stakes, high stress environments, how can mindfulness help those individuals to perform under pressure? What skills can it give them to enable that pause, to develop their situational awareness, for example? What's the transfer?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one which I sort of get asked quite often. And I think that if we look at what people are doing when they're under pressure, it doesn't matter if they're in the military or it doesn't matter if they're in a corporate environment, they're being bombarded on many different angles. And our awareness, therefore, is split over a whole load of different areas. So this area of multitasking. Now, multitasking has been much talked about, and multitasking, I don't believe, is often doable. For the fun of the listeners, I'll throw something in now. Do you know the nursery rhyme, Mary had a little lamb, its fleece as white as snow, right? Okay, that's 11 words. So in your mind now, and I get the listeners to do this, what I want you to do is say, Mary had a little lamb, its fleece as white as snow, as fast as you can, and then just put your hand up when you've done it. When I say go, go. Okay, right. So that's probably about 2 seconds. And Martin was first for the listeners on that one. Okay, now count 1 to 11 as fast as you can, and then just put your hand up when you've done it. Go. Okay, JP was on that one, and that was probably 1 second. Now what I want you to do is go Mary 1 had 2 A 3 all the way up to 11. Go. So for the listeners, there's a lot of thinking going on here. There's a lot of laughing. There's a lot of mindset. There's a lot of staring into space. Okay, Martin's finally done it.
I was trying not to listen to you, Tim, as you were trying to concentrate.
I was probably unfair of me, sorry. But what we see there is that took substantially longer time. And in the brain, that's called switching. And then what it is we turn off from one thing, we go, okay, well, you're asking me now to count. Now you're asking me to say a word. And it goes backwards and forwards. And so our awareness is split between these both areas. And so we can't concentrate or give our full concentration on something. So going back to the question, for mindfulness, what it does is it enables us to slow things down, focus where we want to place our attention whilst delivering the same effect. And so it's about seeing the wood from the trees when others are all consumed by all this bombardment, and therefore gaining the competitive advantage. So I think through mindfulness, it's about how do we gain that extra 5% in performance through being able to use mindfulness techniques that can filter out all of the chaff that's coming left and right and enable us to gain focus on what it is that we're doing.
So you mentioned techniques. What are some of the commonly used techniques which are used by practitioners such as yourself to help develop mindfulness within individuals or groups of individuals?
So again, it depends on the time frame that you've got. To change the neural pathways in the mind is, depending on who you speak to, 25, 30 days, whatever it may be. It's a long period of time, right? And Friedrich Nietzsche said, what you practice, you become. It's all about the practice of those techniques to be able to gain the results moving forward. So I often get people saying to me, can you just teach me a box breath? The jury is out on box breathing. If you look at the research, it's actually for people who have been through, and this is where the trauma training comes in, if you've been through rape, if you've been through childhood trauma, if you've been through a lot of those issues where somebody's strangled you or constrained that breath, box breathing can be exceptionally traumatic for people. So the way that I tend to go about it is stay away from that, but help people find an anchor. Whatever that anchor is, it could be your hands, it could be your seat, it could be your feet on the floor. It's entirely down to you. And so the first thing that I do with people is really, let's try and find the anchor. But in doing that, it's a sense of re-engaging with the body. Because a lot of elite operators, a lot of elite sportsmen, a lot of people that have been in high performance their whole life have genuinely been in such cortisol overload or amygdala hijack that their sympathetic nervous system is so high that you're almost peeling them off the ceiling before getting them down to a window of tolerance that they can operate in and understand what it is you're doing. And a lot of that comes back to Pierre Genet's work in 1867, where he developed this three-stage model, which interestingly, very few people use, which is, okay, how do we establish stabilization and safety first in the person that we're working with? And by the way, that can take a week, it can take a year, it can take 2 years. So I've worked with people where that stabilization safety has taken 1.5 years, especially operators who are operating at a high level. They're constantly on alert. How do you bring that down so that then you can look at the second stage, which is the traumatic memory and recovery, and then the third stage, which is integration. The thing that annoys me most more than anything else is this idea that you have to address the traumatic memory and recovery to get into a better place. You don't. For some people, just stabilization and safety is enough for them to lead a normal daily life. Does that sort of answer it?
It does. That's a great answer, Tim. If I'm working with someone who doesn't have trauma, then people who have got no traumatic experiences, they are just looking for the edge. They're saying, right, I just want to get better at what I do. Maybe they recognize that reaction and response. They react in a certain way. They'd prefer to respond in another way. Where does mindfulness fit as a performance enhancing strategy?
Yeah, so again, a good question. I think from a performance point of view, and this is where the purists get really wrapped around an axle. And I've had it on a regular basis, especially working with the military, of people coming to me saying, you're training better killers. And my answer to that is, it doesn't matter who I'm teaching them to be a better individual in their own right. If the corollary of that is then they then go to be better at their job, that's not my issue, right? Because the important thing to remember here is it's about the families as well as the individual. If you can get somebody who doesn't have that transference going back to their family get into it, then we're looking at families that don't go on SSRIs. And bearing in mind, SSRIs might be appropriate for some people. I'm not saying they're not, but it basically tries to address the whole family here. So in terms of your question, if I give you an example, just to probably bring it to light, if you are a performance individual and you're constantly reacting and you're constantly at this high cortisol stress level, you're not going to be able to focus your attention in the way that you want to be able to focus it. You're not going to be able to separate a lot of the wheat from the chaff. And a classic example I give to people is if you're going down the motorway and somebody cuts you up, what's your first reaction? Generally, it's a lot of swearing, it's a lot of gestures, it's a lot of everything else. That comes from our limbic survive flight routine. It then goes to prefrontal cortex, says, have I seen this before? Yes, I have. What did you do? Or you stuck two fingers up, you shouted, and you got really annoyed. If we can just put a pause between that nanosecond reaction of the reactivity to then be able to respond, and we can practice that over time, what we find is that that becomes automatic pilot. And most of what we do on a daily life is done automatic pilot, whether that's driving to work, whether that's eating a meal, whether that's interaction with a lot of things. If we can say stop, physically say stop, then we're physically interrupting that pathway between our limbic brain and our prefrontal cortex to take out the memory. If we breathe, then we're anchoring ourselves here and now. Okay, I'm ready for this. What is it? I'm here, I'm present. I'm not thinking about stuff in the past. I'm not thinking about stuff in the future. I'm ready to sort of deal with this. The mantra that I came up, well, I didn't come up with it, but I've adapted it, which is stop, breathe, reflect, and choose. Reflect. Okay, that person who cut me up might be having a bad day, might be pregnant, might be going to hospital, they might be bad driver. Choose. Okay, do you know what? I'm choosing not to react. They're 300 meters down the road. I'm not going to crash my day. I'm not going to get those thoughts going through my mind for the rest of the day of what ifs. I'm just going to let it go. Now, to most people listening, they're like, yeah, right, I'm just going to react. Well, that's the thing. Again, Friedrich Nietzsche, what you practice, you become. You've got to practice it. And that is the core thing. It's not me teaching necessarily. It's about the individual learning that they need to practice these techniques to make them successful. And with the high performance people, the special operators, they have a inbuilt modus operandi that they will practice and practice and practice and practice. And therefore they become actually some of the most successful clients I've had.
Yeah, in my experience, they definitely have that drive to succeed, I think is a way of putting it. So practice comes into that. I was listening to you talking then, and I've experienced other types of therapeutic approach, CBT sorts of approaches, and then the philosophical grounding of Stoic philosophy. Mindfulness, correct me if I'm wrong, has got more of a Buddhist sort of philosophy. And one of the observations that I've made, I wonder if you could maybe clarify or correct me if I've got it wrong, things like Stoicism seems to be very cognitive. It's about where your thoughts are. It's about understanding that difference between reaction and response. But it is very much about how you think and how your cognitions then determine your emotional state. Mindfulness seems to be a bit more holistic in that there is the breathing, there is the body scanning type technique. There seems to be a bit more of the whole person. When I've done MBCT as a participant, when I've experienced it, it was very physically relaxing. There's a lot more beyond just the cognitive. Is that right? Is it meant to be a whole body thing, or have I misinterpreted that?
No, you haven't at all. And this is a really important point, is that the Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, all those sorts of people really didn't know necessarily about the interaction between mind-body and that mind-body connection. And so everything was mind-based. Well, if I think this and you think that, then that's the way that you will be. What we haven't understood up until fairly recently is just how powerful that mind-body connection is. The body is the radar for the mind. You know, the body will push and will let us go, and it'll go, right, you know, if you go run a marathon, after the marathon, it will tell you, I'm knackered, I need to relax. And so what do? We relax because it's a known thing that we do. But there'll be times when we push our body, and this is where the Special Forces philosophy falls down, in my view, is that this unrelenting pursuit of excellence tells us to ignore our body, take it further, further. And then the body just turns around and goes, right, bang, have some of that. And then you fall over and then you're having an issue. But I think the thing with modern mindfulness, if I can put it that way, is our ability to use mindfulness to understand that body-mind connection. Understand that the body will never lie to you, but your mind will lie to you on a daily basis, right? It's this thought process that we have however many thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000s of thoughts, but what we don't need to do is get on board with every single one of them. We can just recognize that, do you know what, my shoulder's aching. Okay, I recognize that. Let's move on. Let's understand that. And we can choose where to focus our attention. So whilst the Stoic philosophers offer us good insight into the mind and that cognitive piece, the Buddhist philosophy with Vedana feeling and Tanha and Dukkha and all that sort of stuff are very valuable. But if we can combine the two and understand that mind-body connection and how they interact with each other, that's where it becomes really powerful. And certainly with the work that I've done around mindfulness with high-performance people is you just need to tell them the why. Why does this work? Why is it important? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And then you get this light then that makes that connection between mind and body. And that's quite powerful.
I could not agree more. Anybody listening to this can go on to ChatGPT right now and ask for a series of techniques that will help you control your thoughts or control your emotions or whatever it is you want to do. But I've noticed time and time again, the real transformation occurs when there is the understanding of the why. You've got the technique, but you get it. You get why you're doing that technique.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely reflects my reality. Maybe we should be writing a letter to certain organizations and say, always a little further, brackets with adequate rest. Is that a new motto maybe?
Yeah. I think as we look at it and we see people going through it, and certainly the people that I get on my doorstep doesn't come from the units themselves. It comes from referrals of people that I've seen who then onward refer, who have this real scare around the stigma of just opening up to mental health and actually coming forward and talking to somebody. But actually, you then see how they are in 6 and 7 weeks' time and send them back to the units, and they're completely different people. I've had people who have had suicidal idealization. I've had rank range from Major General all the way down to Trooper and Private Soldier. It is no distinguisher of illness or anything else. But I think the key part in all of those, as we said, is the understanding of the why. Why am I doing this? Why do I feel like I feel? And what can I do about it? And how can I understand it? And then the light bulb goes on, and then it's like, okay, I get it now. I understand it. But with the NHS, especially with IAPT, talking therapy, giving you 7 sessions, and you walk through the door, the first thing they say is, okay, what's a traumatic memory then? Let's have a chat. And you're like, whoa, I haven't built that trust with you. I haven't built that safety with you. I don't want to talk about it. And if you do, you're just going to push me further into trauma. So again, I get people that have come through that system, DCMH as well, and that are sort of saying, look, if this is going to be like a normal therapy session, then I'm not interested. And I go, look, let's peel this right back. And then once we do the why and the basics, it's more understood.
I follow a similar process. You've got to differentiate what I'm there to do and what I'm there not to do. I think that's a really big part of it, to, like you say, to build that trust. If people don't connect with you, it's very difficult to help them. If they don't trust and they don't want to talk to you, you're on a very difficult path. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Tim, as you were chatting there's 3 words popped in my head around the application of mindfulness around high performance mainly, and they were the context, reframing and reflection. Yeah. So that ability to obviously apply it in the right context at the right time, ability to reframe, but that importance of reflection, reflecting upon the situation you're in, and can you pause, can you dial down, do you need to pause, do you need to dial down, or do you just crack on? So with that in mind, going back to the initial idea of context, do you feel there's times where the ideas of mindfulness takes prevalence, and there's times where, all right, we just need to park it and focus on driving through?
Wow. Yes. Again, it depends on the standard and the understanding you have of mindfulness. Because I think if you have integrated mindfulness into your life and there are areas where that becomes automatic pilot, then you're doing it anyway and you're not even recognizing that you're doing it, all right? Much like a soldier would have TTPs, standard operating procedures, they just do it because they've learned it, and that's what you do when you go through a door. You switch on to automatic pilot. So don't get me wrong, automatic pilot is very good in some circumstances, but it's looking at where in our daily life it's not relevant, and actually we could gain so much more if we were not on autopilot. And that is about listening. It's about active listening to the people that are around you. An exercise which everyone always laughs at me at is mindful walking. Oh God, we've got to do this mindful walking sort of crap, And then you take them into a place in the countryside on a path, and you take the phones off them. Believe it or not, people turn up with Apple AirPods.
So they're listening to Headspace.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm listening to Headspace. And then I'll come on to Headspace later. That's another whole world of hurt. And it's like, look, just go natural. Let's just start off. And then you do literally 50 steps. That's it, maximum 50 steps on a path. And you turn around to them and say, well, what have you got from this? And they turn around and they say, my God, I could actually hear birds singing. I could see color really vividly. I could really have an appreciation of just what's around me at the time. And I said, great. If you've got that, how do you think that's going to affect your daily life? And one of the first exercises we do in mindfulness, which is really powerful, which again, I'm sure you know about, is called the raisin exercise. And it is about giving everyone a raisin. And they look at this thing and go, well, why the hell have I got a raisin? They said, look, it's not a raisin. It's an object. Just look at it. And then you go through the 5 senses. You go through touch, smell, hearing, and you look at it. What do you see? Is it got ridges on it? Then you squeeze it. Does it sound anything? You taste it, but don't chew it. And then you chew it and you get this eruption of taste. And at the end of it, you say, okay, there's a reason why I did that. How do you feel? And they just go, wow, I've never tasted such intensity of a raisin. Or I've never known that they're so ridged. Or I've never known that they make a squeak if you squeeze it next to your ear, and they're good ones. All these little things. And then again, you say, okay, take that to the next time you go and eat. So when we go and eat, especially as a military person, you're bred to get in, get out as fast as you can. So you shovel everything down and you're just thinking about other things and you don't appreciate what it is you're eating. Sit down with your family, have no phones at the table, just make it an implicit agreement that you're going to sit there and just really savor what it is that your wife, partner, husband, whatever is cooked, and just see what a difference that makes. And then by learning that, we learn that we spend so much of our life on autopilot. We're appreciating very little of what we do on a daily basis and around us. That's when the penny drops for a lot of people and they go, okay, I need to change the way I'm doing things.
Is there a danger in that? Like you said, sometimes you do want to be on an autopilot. If you practice something so many times that you can just do it automatically. I think the phrase that comes to mind is paralysis by analysis. We used to talk about this a lot with skill acquisition. If you're learning to hit a golf ball, it's very easy to completely ruin your swing by overthinking where your arm should be and where your hip should be and where your knee should be.
Yeah, so the way I'd answer that is, it's not about you mindfully thinking about how you're going to do that swing. That becomes automatic pilot. That has probably been automatic pilot for a long time. But it does come to the point of getting yourself in a mindful state before you hit that golf ball.
Right.
So, the SEAL teams, before they get on an operation, some of them will sit down and they'll do 5 minutes of mindfulness. The mindfulness probably isn't going to help the outcome of the mission, but what it is going to do is put them in a mindful state, ready to do the maximum they can do of the stuff that's on autopilot that they've already learned, that are ingrained into them. It's going to make them more aware and focused to be able to do what it is. So I think what mindfulness gives you is, it's not trying to replace autopilot. It's not trying to change anything. It's trying to alert you to greater awareness, to put you in a state where whatever it is you're doing, you're going to do to the maximum ability that you can.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. I like that.
Tim, do you feel that the environment, and you mentioned obviously mindful walking there, can make a difference? If we could take people into different environments, may that be in the mountains, on the ocean, for example. I just think to the experiences we had with our project called UpSurf.
Yeah.
You had some of the surfers on there, probably the most zen people I've ever met in my life, on the water. Off the water, they're a different kettle of fish, arguably. But those environments, they attune you once you dial in, and people seem to be a lot calmer and more relaxed. Whereas if you try to do it in a yoga studio, for example, in an inner city, and all you can hear is an ambulance or blue light in the background, it's obviously quite different. So do you think that the environment in which you're in can make a marked difference?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because if you go to the purest of teaching mindfulness, you embrace all sounds that you hear and you just recognize them and let them go. This idea that if you attribute all the thoughts that you have and all of the sounds that you hear to like buses, it's about sitting at the bus stop and working out which bus you're going to get on, rather than trying to get on every single one, because you're just not going to be able to do it. And so I think that environment certainly does have an effect. But as you get down to it, and the joy of it is that you can practice mindfulness whilst driving your car. You can practice mindfulness whilst fishing at a river. You can practice it on a bus. You can practice it whilst flying an aircraft. You can practice it anywhere. It's just knowing what techniques you use to do that. And so this is where the sort of understanding of mindfulness falls apart to some degree for a lot of people, is that they just picture you sitting cross-legged on a mat somewhere or in a yoga studio practicing mindfulness. I'm 6'5" and I'm never going to be good at yoga. And I certainly get bored if I'm sitting in a yoga mat. So for me, it was how can I embrace it into my daily life of walking, of interacting, of eating, it just becomes autopilot. And the sounds actually add to the experience once you sort of know what they are and what they represent.
I will say, Tim, when I have been in that sort of yoga studio environment doing mindfulness, one of the nicest sounds is at the end of the practice when the guide hits the Chinese, oh, you've got one here, you've got one. That's the sound. That's the sound. I used to love that. When you get to the end of the practice and they'd hit that, what is it, a bowl or a bell? What would you call it?
So I got this one from Nepal, this factory in Nepal, which was like the Rolls Royce of bowls. And we went through ages of trying to work out, and I thought, I'm never going to get a bloody bowl. But interestingly, if you've ever looked at, and I'm sure, Martin, you have, the solfeggio frequencies of, 428 hertz and 953 hertz of the healing frequencies, basically, of music, then this sound is one of those frequencies that just gets straight to the memory and is quite a healing sound. Now, some people go, no, it's not. But actually, over time, you get used to it, and it's really good to use.
I used to love it. I was very, very skeptical about mindfulness, as a lot of people probably are. I think there is that crystals and meditation sort of thing. I was very, very skeptical of it and went along to a few different sessions, and I did get a lot out of it. And I vividly remember that sound. Whenever I hear that sound, I almost do feel quite relaxed. It's definitely had an effect on me. I'm feeling quite chilled out now.
I'm normally asleep by that point.
Yeah, people they used to fall asleep in the sessions. That was quite common.
Yeah.
Tim, can we talk about your role as the Colonel for mental health? Like, what was that and how did you get into that job?
So again, it was pure by chance and not at all engineered. We are seeing a rise in suicide rates. We're seeing a rise in mental ill health within the army. How can I use the experience that I've had over 15 years to sort of help with what's going on? I was working with Ali Everest, who was the assistant head of sort of effectively mental health in the army. And Deputy Chief of the General Staff at that time was a guy called Nick Pope, who was my adjutant when I was with the Gurkhas out in Hong Kong back in 1989, 1990. And Ali Everest went to him and basically said, look, we could use this guy at the moment as a sort of an advisor and sort of moving forward. So effectively, at a time when COVID was hitting, when people were going remote, people had never really understood mental health in the army, and to some degree, they still don't, which might be a contentious statement to make. But what it allowed me to do was I looked through 281 different apps that people use for mental health, most of which have been created with good intention, but very few are clinically validated, NICE accredited, or anything else. And then you look at retention rates. The retention rate after 6 months for Headspace is less than 1%. And so why is that? Why is it that people are looking at it but aren't using it? And the answer comes from we are inherently lazy as individuals, and therefore the only reason that we'd use something is if we get nudge techniques. This ability is to say, look, come on, it's your day now, here's this, here's that. And then I was asked to sort of advise on an app called Leafyard, which was completely different in the way that it did things. It took cognitive behavioural therapy, it took nudge techniques, it took everything else across a piece. And we tried it amongst the veterans, 10,000 veterans so far. We've tried it in the Navy, the Army, and also the RAF. And we're seeing an 85% engagement rate after 6 months. And we're trialing it within certain SF environments as well. The reason why that is because people are invested in a journey. And what I was finding when I was sitting as Colonel Mental Health was there was no journey for people along mental health. It was point and shoot interactions. It was lectures on this is how the brain works and this is why this works and this is why that works, which is probably useful, but it doesn't give people a journey to go on. And that's why I was determined to try and make a change in the way that we looked at mental health. What I was finding was that there was a lot of mental health issues in the army from people that were not willing to come forward with them for fear of losing their jobs and for fear of getting into a bad place. We trained up a really great group of people who really understood mental health that went out to all areas of the army. And we covered over 50,000 members of the army by the time I left. And then at 2022, that time frame came to an end. It was all too difficult because of the way the army works and the commission structures to sort of extend that. So I then left. Most of the stuff that we put in place fell away or got divested out. It was a good 3 years. Would I do it again? Probably not. There's just no freedom of action to implement what it is you need to implement to make sure that it works. But I have ultimate respect for the people that are trying. I have ultimate respect for the people that are working on the front line on a daily basis. And as ever, I just stand ready to help if I'm required.
I remember when you were in that role, and I definitely observed some significant change. Just interviewing key people at the time, just the exposure, I think, was really helpful. Coming back to some of the things you've talked about around stigma, how have you navigated that stigma to help people engage with these topics?
Yeah, I think that, again, it's leading by example, isn't it? I think that's why I was given that rank and told to get on with it. It's because you walk into a room and people automatically assume a level of knowledge, assume a level of, right, okay, I'll listen to this guy rightly or wrongly. But I think that also there's generally a lack of knowledge and people are scared. That's why the stigma is there. What they don't know is fearful, and they're therefore fearful of the consequences of them saying something or opening up. But also a lack of understanding of the signs that the body is telling them that they are either fragged or burnt out or whatever. And I was finding that what was really working from an initial stage was I said, look, if I'm going to do this role, I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to show vulnerability. And that got a lot of incoming, by the way. I mean, all sorts of horrible, horrible emails and interactions with people that just said, oh, you're a fraud, you know nothing about mental health, blah, blah, whatever it is. But what they were coming from was they were coming from deeply disturbed people or people who are unhappy with their own life that really couldn't find another way to let that out. And so what I did was I took every one of those and I engaged with them if I could find out who they were, and I'd sit down with them and I'd say, what is your evidence behind this? Why are you thinking like this? And very quickly it would all break down to them having an issue that they needed to talk about but couldn't find a way other than by attacking somebody. But it was also the ability to turn around and say, for the first time, I'm going to offer you a concrete path here that you can follow, that you can engage with, that is going to help you get through this. Rather than going to chain of command, and the chain of command doesn't know what's going on or doesn't know where to signpost or doesn't know where to help. It's also about separating the wheat from the chaff. And what I mean by that is we get bombarded with so many mental health initiatives. We don't know what to follow. We don't know what to go with. We don't know what to engage with, because that, again, I come back to it, that safety and stabilization hasn't been established with the individual, that permission hasn't been given to engage with them, to help them understand where it is that they can go on that journey. So once I did all of that, and it wasn't just me, by the way, it was a great team that I had surrounding me, I found that the stigma started to drop on an individual basis. Now, the problem comes with an institution. Trying to change culture and ethos within an institution is like trying to change the direction of a supertanker, right? It's going to take a whole load of time. But these are all letters from people who have been either suicidal or in serious areas that were written to me after going to see them and after interacting and after following through. So for me, it was about helping the individual. And then hopefully by helping the individual, the organization would take note and try and change. But the problem is when people are in post for 2 years at a time, corporate knowledge gets forgotten very quickly. And that's exactly what's happened and exactly where we are right now.
Tim, just sort of expanding on that. So obviously over the past decade, there's been this increased interest in the concept known as human performance optimization, whereby we look to optimize human performance capabilities up to the limit of one's biological potential, which is great. And I think the research and the science is certainly there, but now it's the trick is how do we apply this? How do we codify this knowledge? How do we write it as a doctrine? Do we write it as a policy? How do we actually go out and deliver it? So with that in mind, and given obviously the requirement to habitualize these mindfulness concepts, do you think it's something that we could integrate within an HPO doctrine in all the different domains, whereby the fundamental concepts of mindfulness underpin a lot of practices? May it be physical training, for example, when we do recovery-based training modalities, or is it if we have psychological-based interventions, whatever it is. If we have these fundamentals, and I think what you said there, stop, breathe, reflect, choose, and we think about very carefully, where could we integrate these little ideas? Do you think that could make a change? And obviously appreciate changing the culture, changing the ethos, try to steer the Titanic in a different direction. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen in the next 10 years, probably 2 or 3 decades, but we need to start somewhere. Do you think that could be done?
So if you look at the waiting list at the moment for psychiatric care, it ranges anywhere between 6 and 18 months. The only critical care for suicidal idealization is A&E. And that's shocking because you go to A&E and the CMT teams there just can't handle it. So I took a guy to A&E in Salisbury, and he said, look, if you let me out of here, then I'm going to go and drive my car as fast as I can in Salisbury Plain and wrap myself around a tree. And they were like, yeah, okay, I understand that, but we can't help, come back in 72 hours. And they sent him home. He did go out, he did wrap his car around a tree, and he did kill himself. So that is the area that we're in with a lot of people who have those levels of suicidal idealization. Why do I say this? Because it's proven in research that if you can do some form of mindfulness-based course and then implement mindfulness into your life, it doesn't have to be mindfulness, but it has to be a journey of something that you engage with. By the time you come and see that psychiatrist or psychologist or get that psychiatric care, quite often you don't need that psychiatric care by the time you get there. So if you look at then promote, prevent in that space, and how we can put it, prior to people going on selection or arduous courses, SCBC or Platoon Commander's Battle Course, or going through Sandhurst or whatever it is, if we can give them some tools and techniques as they go through that training, then we hopefully will end up with a more resilient individual, hopefully more understanding individual. They will perform better. And then hopefully, if I use the analogy of the glass, where we're constantly filling the glass until it overflows, what we've done by doing mindfulness or leaf yard or a journey or whatever it is we've put the tap in the side to be able to turn it on so that when things get tough, they can turn that tap on, go back to their habits and never overflow in that glass. And I think that if we can do that and we can implement it, and there is vision from the hierarchy that understands that and embraces that, and there lies the problem, we can achieve quite a lot of change. And things ain't getting easier. Things are not getting easier for people in the armed forces. And by the way, that's not only in UK, it's in America, it's in Norway, it's in Sweden, it's in Denmark, it's in Singapore, it's in a raft of places. How can we integrate this into what we do on a daily basis? So a long-winded way of saying, I think it's vital to try and work a way to get this into human performance, because you are addressing the fundamental element of what human performance is, which is the individual. And if you can assist and get that body and mind into a stable platform, then any of the other techniques that you do are only going to help. It's a three-legged stool, isn't it? It's the physical, the mental, and then the well-being. If you can sort that out, then you're in a really good place. If any one of those fails, and mindfulness addresses all three, if any one of those fails, then you're sort of on a road to suffering.
Can we come back to mindfulness? And would it be okay to talk us through a simple practice so the listeners can kind of join in and do something just to introduce them to the concept? Would that be okay?
Yeah, sure. So I'll caveat this with saying don't expect miracles after one practice of it, but it's something that you've got to practice. Therefore, to do something that you can remember, I'll do a very simple one. And when we start mindfulness, we start to look at this interaction again between the body and the mind. That is one of the fundamental first lessons that we do within mindfulness. So recognizing within our body. So what I say to people is, okay, just sit in your chair wherever you are. Just place your feet on the floor and then with your back fairly straight as though somebody's got a string pulling up on your head. And that's free supporting your back. And then just lay your hands wherever comfortable, but in your lap, over on top of each other. And then if it's good for you, just close your eyes, gently close your eyes or lower your gaze. And then what I say to them is this, we'll go through the practice. I say, once you're in that position and you're happy, if it's good for you, just start to breathe naturally in through the nose and then out through the nose when you come back up. It's just feeling that breath going in through the nose, down through the back of the throat, and then to the abdomen. And where the abdomen is, it's about maybe placing your hand on it and just feeling it rise as you breathe in through the nose, and then feeling it lower as you breathe out. And we're not trying to change anything. We're not trying to force the breath, not counting it. We're just sitting with that right now, just breathing in through the nose, feeling the effect as it goes down the back of the throat and onto the abdomen. And so what we're doing here is just establishing a rhythm, not trying to change anything. And obviously, as you start out in this, you're probably at a stage where your thoughts and mind is wandering all over the place. And what it is not judging that, not getting frustrated. It's just gently recognizing it. Okay, mind's wandering. And just gently bringing it back to the breath. So we're sort of bringing it back to that gentle breath. And at the same time as you're breathing, maybe now, it's shifting that awareness, that attention to the soles of your feet. How does it feel? Does it feel that your feet are heavy? Does it feel planted? Does it feel safe? Does it feel connected? So at the same time as you're breathing in, you're just sending that awareness down to your feet. And taking a couple of breaths, just thinking about that and just noting the sensations. You're not trying to change it, you're not trying to force it, you're just noting what's going on. And then with the next out breath, letting go of that awareness to the feet, moving it to the seat where you're sitting on that chair or that sofa. Again, what's the feeling? Maybe it's tense, maybe you can feel that connection. Maybe there's some numbness because you've been sitting there for a long period of time, whatever it may be. Maybe there's nothing, but just sensing what's there right here and right now. Again, breathing at the same time, just keeping that breathing going. And then with the next out breath, it's letting go of the seat and moving to the hands. What are the hands feeling right now? Do they feel clammy? Do they feel tense? Do they feel comfortable? Are you relaxed? Just getting a sense of what's going on with the hands right now. And then when you're ready, just letting go of that sensation in the hands, that awareness, and then back to the breath again. In through the nose, feeling that abdomen rise, and then out through the nose again. And maybe just take 2 or 3 in your own time of those breaths. And then when you're ready, when it's good for you, when you open your eyes, just look around the room, just get a sense of where you are, the environment that you're in, and then just come back.
Do we get a bong at the end, Tim? We need the bong. There we go. Beautiful. Superb. That was great.
And I think the importance of that one is that it's about exploring the why. You're exploring again any sensations or feelings. You're feeling an area of your body that makes you feel safe. For some people, the breath doesn't work. But if you can find an anchor that works for you and you find yourself in a tense situation or you find yourself going into a tense situation, if you can just do that for 3 minutes and define your anchor and go back to it. So if it's for my feet example, I start the breathing, I breathe, and then I send that awareness to my feet. I feel grounded. I come back to the breath. It just lowers everything back down. And you'll probably find that you can go into a meeting or whatever that becomes a lot calmer. If you want something quicker, the stop, breathe, reflect, and choose methodology works really well. And I've yet to find anyone that can't find a scenario where that doesn't work, whether it's having an argument with the family, whether it's answering an email, or whether it's driving on a motorway. If you just can get stop, breathe, reflect, and choose in your head, then actually you go from this reactivity to response, which is where you want to be.
Hopefully no one's driving on the motorway now trying just to caveat that we should have put that in the beginning. Maybe not while you're operating heavy machinery.
Yeah, or flying.
Yeah. Coming back to some of the misconceptions, I think I've been guilty of this. Like early on when I was first introduced to mindfulness, like I've said, I thought it was nonsense. And I still see it now. When you're trying to introduce this sort of technique or this sort of way of living, it's not just a technique, is it? It's more than that. You come up against myths and misconceptions and reasons why it won't work and all this kind of stuff. What are the predominant myths that you hear? If you're going to send an email to a senior leader, you're going to go to a meeting and where you're really trying to sell them the idea that this is something that people would benefit from. How do you do that?
So if I look at misconceptions first, the first one that I experience a lot, especially in big boards, alpha male boards like banking organizations, is it's a sign of weakness, right? It's all hippie, as Bill Bailey said, it's the Reiki flakerati. It's that whole sort of perception. Another element is that they have a misconception that if I engage with this, I'm going to lose my job. It means I've got a mental ill health issue. They don't see the journey and the widening of perception that somebody can have going through a mindfulness course or even through a mental ill health journey when they come out the other end. But the fundamental question I get is, okay, listen, you want me to expend money on this. How does this soft stuff help me in my business? And my argument is, well, if you can help address the person, the individual, and that gets them to a better space, and their family are in a better space, then what you have as an organization is going to be better. You're going to have people that are firing on all cylinders. They can address the balance of life and work. Their three-legged stool is in shape, and that they've got a good supporting network around them. And then the other one I have is, well, I've got mental health first aid trainers, so I'm all good, right? And this tick box mentality of, right, mental health, yeah, we tick that box, yeah, great, right, don't worry about it. It's almost a scare of an organization to want to engage because they're afraid of people coming forward. But once they understand that it's a journey, and the journey in long term is better financially because there's less days off with presenteeism, there's less days off with mental health issues, blah, 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 then they sort of start to engage with it. But again, there are so many organizations out there that are swayed by the app fraternity that just engage with an app and just use it as part of the EAP program. They say, right, use this app. And we know from Headspace, we know from HeadFit, a lot of these other apps out there, that the take-up rate is probably quite nice because people think, oh, I'll do it. But after 6 months, you engage with them, and it's not just me saying this, it's clinical evidence.
My phone's full of those health apps that
Yeah.
I haven't looked at for months, if not years.
Yeah. And I rest my case. Inherently, as I say, we're lazy. We haven't got the ability to sort of continue along that journey. So it's about what's clinically validated, what's got good randomized controlled trials, what actually works. Coming to the second part of your question, which was the most effective way to embed that into high performance cultures, I think the answer is really slowly and carefully through thorough explanation and demonstration. And there's nothing better than helping people on a one-to-one basis who are then your ambassadors and your biggest advocates. That's the cleanest and the simplest and the most effective way that I introduce this to organizations, is when people go back and say, if I hadn't have this, I would be dead, or I would be divorced, or whatever it is. So slowly and carefully is really important. When I studied trauma sensitivity and trauma training, I was really struck by Pierre Genet's work in 1867, even back then, where he recognized that establishing the safety and the stabilization was really key. We don't have to address the traumatic memory recovery unless we wish to. So, that is something that is a choice for us. And then it's about how do you learn and integrate the lessons that you learned to gain stabilization safety and to deal with your traumatic memory recovery into a lifelong journey of learning and continuation. And I think that what we need to do is have an NHS that spends, and I know it's stretched and I know all of those issues, but giving somebody 7 sessions and saying, right, this will sort you out or hopefully sort you out is not going to address the issue. You have to peel them off the ceiling first thing. And that's where I think mindfulness has a real place to play in peeling people off the ceiling to put them in a space where they can interact and they can work. And certainly the Americans that I'm working with at the moment, they're talking about, stellate ganglion blocks, which is an injection into the neck to sort of numb that system. That's great, but unless you follow it up with a CBT-based or a mindfulness-based journey or therapy, for want of a better way of putting it, that SGB is going to wear off and you're going to be back in the same position. All the SGB is doing is taking you off the ceiling, putting you in a window of tolerance, and then that's where the mindfulness can kick in. So embed it slowly, carefully, make it evidence-based, really check on who your implementer is and are they qualified, and then go on a journey. That would be my advice.
That's really good advice. Tim, this has been a fantastic conversation. I feel like I've learnt loads. I always do when I talk to you, so no surprises there. What we like to do on the podcast is allow you to wrap it up for us, an opportunity for you to give us a final word, to reiterate something that's very important to you, or to introduce something that maybe you haven't talked about yet. So over to you, Tim. How would you like to finish this episode?
I think what I'd say is don't wait to fall over. Okay, learn about the signs that your body gives you and don't ignore them. If we catch them earlier, there's so much more we can do. Not that we can't do something if it's left late, but catch the signs early, learn to live with your body. It will pay you dividends. Really interrogate who is giving you the advice that you're getting. Are they trained? This idea of trauma sensitivity at the moment is really quite powerful, and not understanding it can put you in a more difficult place. So how are they trauma sensitive? How are they trauma trained? And make sure the person you engage with is there for you. It's your journey. You need to own that journey. And the person that's delivering the advice is just there to facilitate that and to catch you when you fall. And, as I say to everyone, there is no stigma about reaching out. And I say this because of the hundreds of people that I've talked to, that I've supported. through all sectors of society and at all stages of life, the one thing they all say is, I'd wish I'd engaged with this earlier. So if you feel that there is something that you need to talk about, reach out on, then please do reach out and we can have a conversation. But just engage earlier. And it's important not only for you, but also your family as well. And if you can work that with you and the family, then you become a much tighter unit. And then, hopefully you don't sort of fall over at the end.
Thank you. If people do want to contact you, if they want to follow what you're doing, is there a way of people doing that?
Yeah, if they want to reach out via the podcast, then very happy to sort of engage that way. My load is quite high at the moment with sessions, as you can imagine, but I always make time. All the military work I do pro bono. So it's just finding a slot to sort of fit that in, but more than happy to do that.
Great stuff. Tim, as I said, thoroughly enjoyable. It's a great thing to talk about, and I'm really glad you were able to find the time to talk to us today. So again, thank you very much.
Really good. Thank you.
And the perfect ending. That's it for this week's episode of the Optimizing Human Performance podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and if you found this valuable, take a moment to rate and review the podcast. If you know someone who'd benefit from today's conversation, then please share this with them. We're always keen to hear your thoughts. If you have feedback, guest suggestions, or topics that you'd love us to cover, then email us at info@ophp.co.uk or connect with us on LinkedIn. Until next time, keep striving, keep improving, and keep optimizing your performance.